Mama needs help. A little girl knocked at midnight. Mama needs help. The widowed rancher lit every lantern. Silver Creek, Wyoming Territory. Deep winter, 1885. Silver Creek lay nestled between towering mountains and frost-covered valleys. A quiet settlement, half swallowed by snow. Since late November, ice had blanketed the land, freezing rivers deeper than memory. By deep winter, the cold cut sharper than steel, and even the stars seemed distant and frozen, like something unreachable and lost. High above the settlement, on a hillside buried in white, stood a lonely timber cabin, dark, silent, and still. No light flickered behind its windows. No smoke rose from its stone chimney. It looked like a home forgotten, but it wasn't. It was simply a house where warmth had long since died. Inside sat Owen Garrett. He was a tall, broad man in his mid-40s, bearded, weathered, worn down by years of grief. 7 winters ago, a fever outbreak stole his wife Clara and their son Benjamin while he was away trading cattle. Since then, Owen had lived in silence, lighting no fires after dark, speaking to no one, keeping company only with memories and the creak of frozen wood. On this particular night, as snow fell heavy outside and the hearth remained cold, Owen sat hunched in a chair, staring at nothing. Then, knock, knock, knock. He blinked. A knock. It came again, harder this time, against the wood. Owen stood slowly, his joints protested as if unused to movement. He stepped to the door and opened it. A rush of freezing wind filled the room, and standing at the threshold was a little girl, no more than 5, wrapped in a ragged blanket. Her cheeks were red, her lips blue, her hair dusted with ice. She didn't cry, she didn't beg, but her eyes burned with something stronger than cold. "Please, mister," she said, voice tight and shaking. "Mama needs help," she gasped, "and she won't stop shaking." Owen stared. No one had knocked on his door in years. No one had dared. But here stood this child, freezing in the night, eyes locked on his like she knew somehow that he was her only hope. He crouched beside her, his voice rough from disuse. "How far is your mama, little one?" "By the frozen creek," she whispered. "We were crossing. Mama fell through. I tried to pull her, but she told me to run, to find help." Her small fists clenched at her sides. She looked exhausted, but not defeated. That fire in her eyes reminded Owen too much of Benjamin, his little boy who never quit, even in stories. Without a word, Owen pulled off his heavy fur coat and wrapped it around her. "Let's warm you up first, then we'll go get your mama." She blinked, nodding slowly. He lifted her gently into the cabin, set her near the door, then turned toward the corner where an old trunk sat unopened for years. Inside lay a collection of lanterns, dusty but whole. One by one, Owen lit them, his fingers trembling not from cold, but from memory. He set the lanterns along the porch, by the gate, on posts, still visible through snow. The warm glow pushed back the darkness like a beacon. It was the first time in 7 years light had touched this home. Then Owen took the storm lantern from its hook. It was worn, its metal dull, but the glass still held strong. He filled it with oil, struck a match, and watched as the wick flared to life. Golden light spilled across the floor. The girl, still silent, watched everything with wide eyes. Owen looked down at her. "What's your name?" "Sophie." He nodded once. "I'm Owen." He took her small hand in his, the storm lantern in the other. "We will find your mama, Sophie. I give you my word." Together they stepped into the swirling snow, one tall, one small. The lantern's glow lit a golden path ahead, and for the first time in years, Owen Garrett walked into the night, not away from sorrow, but towards something worth saving. Snow lashed sideways across the lantern glass, its light flickering wildly as Owen pushed forward through waist-deep drifts. Sophie clung to his side, half carried by his strong arm, her tiny boots disappearing into the snow with every step. "We're close," she whispered, pointing toward a line of trees by the frozen creek, her voice brittle with cold. "Just past those willows." Owen nodded, jaw clenched. His breath steamed like fog in the bitter dark. They crested a small slope, and there, barely visible beneath a layer of ice and snow, lay Anna Hayes. She was collapsed in a hollow by the water's edge, her blonde hair frozen stiff, one hand clutching her chest. The horse she'd been leading stood nearby, reins caught on a branch, stamping nervously. Anna. Owen dropped to his knees, brushing ice from her face. Her lips were white, her skin cold despite the layers. Her breath came in weak, shallow gasps, and her eyes barely opened before closing again. "She fell through the ice," Sophie said, voice trembling now. The water pulled her under. She screamed once, then went quiet. Owen pressed his hand gently against her neck. Beneath the skin, her pulse was faint, too faint. He could feel it. The danger wasn't just the cold. This was hypothermia setting in fast and deadly. "Anna," he called firmly, leaning close. "You hear me? I'm getting you home. Stay with me." Her eyes flickered open again, pain and fear flashing through them like lightning. "Sophie?" she rasped. "Is she?" "She's safe," he said, already unfastening his scarf. "But you need to hold on." In one smooth motion, Owen stripped off his wool jacket and wrapped it tightly around her torso, securing it with the rope from his pack. Water had soaked through her dress and was beginning to freeze solid. "I need both of you to be strong," he said, his voice gruff but steady. He lifted Anna into his arms. She cried out softly but did not resist. Her entire body was limp with cold and exhaustion. Sophie reached up, taking her mother's frozen fingers in her own as they began the long trek back. Snow blasted into their faces, stinging and blinding, but Owen pushed forward. Step by brutal step, he carried Anna across the frozen land. Sophie trudging silently beside him, one hand clutching her mother's and the other holding tight to Owen's coat. His breath came heavier now, clouding the lamp's glass. Every muscle screamed with strain, but he dared not slow. Each gust of wind was a whisper from the past. You weren't fast enough. You left them alone. You failed them. Not again. Not tonight. He looked down at the woman in his arms and the child at his side. Two souls clinging to life by the thinnest thread. When the cabin finally came into view, lit now by the lanterns he had left burning, Owen surged forward with the last of his strength. Inside, he laid Anna gently on the worn sofa near the fireplace. Sophie crawled beside her, brushing her hair back with trembling fingers. "She's going to be okay now, right?" she asked, voice nearly gone. Owen paused. His hands were wet and cold. The fire crackled. Anna shivered violently, one hand still pressed to her chest, her body convulsing as the cold fought to take her. There was no time. The nearest doctor was over 25 miles away. No rider could make it through the storm in time. He stood still for a long moment, watching her struggle through clenched teeth, watching Sophie curl protectively beside her. Then Owen Garrett turned to the kitchen, grabbed the warmest blankets he owned, fetched a pot of hot water, and took a long, steadying breath. "I will not lose another soul to the cold," he muttered to himself. Owen looked back at the woman shivering in pain and the child looking up at him with silent trust. And he made the choice. He would stay. He would fight. He would save her himself. Tonight, no matter what it took. The storm still raged outside. Wind howled through the cracks in the walls, and snow piled higher against the door. Inside, the dim cabin flickered with the trembling glow of a single oil lamp. Shadows danced on the wooden walls, long and restless. Anna lay on the thick blanket Owen had spread across the floor near the fire, her breath ragged, skin pale, hair soaked and freezing. Her hands gripped the edges of the blanket as another wave of shivering overtook her. Owen knelt at her side, sleeves rolled up, hands trembling slightly as he tried to warm her limbs. "Stay with me, Anna," he said softly but firmly. "I will not lose you." His voice cracked. He had once stood in a similar room miles away, holding his wife's hand as she slipped from him. Too much fever, too little time. The echo of her final breath haunted him even now. But this time he would not freeze, would not hesitate. Sophie sat on a stool beside her mother's head, holding her hand tightly. The little girl had not cried since the night began, but now tears welled up in her eyes. "She's so cold, Mr. Owen," she whispered. "I know, sweetheart, but your voice can help her. Talk to her. Tell her something warm, something that makes her smile." Sophie nodded, wiping her nose with her sleeve. She leaned close and began whispering a story about a rabbit with soft fur, about the spring her mama took her to pick flowers in the meadow. Her voice was shaky, but steady, gentle, steady. Another violent shiver seized Anna's body. She arched with cold and moaned. Ice still clung to her dress beneath the blankets. Owen worked quickly, wrapping heated stones in cloth and placing them near her core. His jaw set, sweat dripping down his temples despite the cold. Her body was shutting down, fighting to survive. "You're not alone," Owen whispered. "Not this time, not ever again." Anna slipped in and out of consciousness. Her fingers clenched Owen's arm in moments of pain, and each time she faded, Sophie's small voice brought her back. Her pulse weakened. The rhythm was off. Owen felt panic rise in his chest, but he swallowed it. He forced his mind to stay focused. Every movement had to count. "You're almost there, Anna," he said. "One more breath. You can do this." Anna's lips moved, but no sound came. Her body trembled with exhaustion. "Breathe," Owen said again louder. "Now." She gasped raw and full, and then warmth. A single heartbeat passed. Then came the breath, deep, strong, impossibly loud in the small room, the first breath of survival. Sophie gasped, her eyes wide with wonder. Owen held the woman's hand in his, cold but warming, and the storm outside seemed to hush just for a moment. Anna, pale-faced and exhausted, opened her eyes and breathed. Owen laughed, choked with emotion. His hands, wet and shaking, held her shoulder with a tenderness he thought had died with his own family. "She's breathing," he whispered, his voice breaking. He turned to Sophie. "Your mama's going to make it." Sophie's smile broke through the tears. Anna opened her eyes slowly, lips trembling. "Is she?" she whispered. "She's safe," Owen said, placing his hand gently on her arm. Anna cried then softly as her hand found her daughter's, and Owen, for the first time in 7 years, sat down, let his head fall into his hands, and wept. Not for the past, but for the miracle that had bloomed in the middle of a storm. The cabin, once so cold and silent, now pulsed with life, saved life, and a man who had lived in shadows now held the light. Morning came slow and pale, seeping through the frost-covered window like a timid guest. The small cabin still smelled faintly of smoke and damp wool, but now it held something else too, warmth. Anna lay on the makeshift bed, her cheeks still pale, but her breathing steady, lips parted softly in sleep. Her hair clung to her damp temples. One hand rested protectively on the blanket covering her chest. Beside her, Sophie sat on a wooden chair, too small for the long night she had endured. Her head leaned against her mother's arm, mouth slightly open in sleep. One small hand still clung to Anna's fingers. Across the room, Owen sat on the floor, his back resting against the cold wall, knees bent, his eyes were open, but soft. In his lap, a tin cup of water sat untouched. He looked at them, the rise and fall of breath. Then he reached over to the bucket of warm water and rinsed his hands slowly, deliberately. The cold had numbed his knuckles. The cloth he used to dry them had belonged to his wife once, embroidered with a faded flower. Owen moved carefully, checking Anna's pulse, inspecting her fingers and toes for frostbite, her steady breathing that had filled the room with the first sound of hope. He found a clean scrap of cloth, warmed it by the fire, and placed it on her forehead with hands that trembled, but not from cold, from reverence. "You came through the ice," he whispered to her. "You're stronger than you know." A soft rustle came from the bed. Anna blinked slowly, her eyes struggling to focus until they landed on him. Her voice cracked like thin ice. "You saved us." Owen looked up. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he shook his head gently. "Sophie found me. I just followed her light." Anna's eyes shimmered, but she did not cry. She only watched as he moved closer, kneeling beside the bed with such care it could have been glass. A moment passed, and then Anna saw the blanket. "This was his?" she asked, her fingers brushing the faded green hem. Owen nodded once. "It was Benjamin's." She held it tighter, like holding it in that piece of memory would somehow keep her warmer. He rose without a word, and walked to a small chest tucked near the door. From it, he pulled out another blanket, an old shawl, actually. A woman's shawl, thick knit, worn at the edges. He laid it gently over Anna's shoulders. "You'll need it more than I ever did." The sunlight crept across the wooden floor, warming the room slowly. Owen walked to the window, hands at his sides. Then, in a motion almost forgotten, he unlatched it. The hinges groaned, but the glass pushed open. A rush of cold air entered, but with it came birdsong, faint but real. He stepped back and let the light fall across the cabin floor. Sophie stirred, blinking awake. Her face was pale, but her smile was as wide as the sun. "Is Mama okay?" Anna nodded. "We're okay now, baby." Owen brought over the plate of bread he had warmed by the fire. "Breakfast?" he said. "It is not much, but it is warm." They ate slowly, the three of them. Bread, a little butter, warm tea in tin cups. Anna ate quietly, strength returning slowly. When they had finished, Owen put on his coat, stepped outside, and crossed the yard, where the snow was beginning to soften under the thin touch of morning. At the edge of the field stood two wooden markers, old and weathered. He knelt before them, pulling from his coat pocket a single dried flower, brittle from the cold, but still whole. He laid it at the base of the stone that read, "Clara and Benjamin Garrett." His voice was soft, almost lost in the wind. "I could not save you, but maybe saving them is part of finding peace." The wind answered with a low hush, and Owen stood, in silence, letting the sunlight finally reach his back. The spring air was cool as Owen guided his horse into Silver Creek, the hooves crunching over thawing earth and patches of melting snow. It had been 7 long years since he'd ridden down Main Street, but now he carried with him a reason and a responsibility. He tied the horse outside the general store and stepped inside to buy medicine, warm clothes, and supplies. Heads turned. Conversations dipped to murmurs. Someone whispered near the fabric aisle. "Did you hear? There's a woman up at his ranch, and a child too." Another voice, hushed but sharp, added, 7 years in the dark, and now he brings a stranger into his house. A woman half frozen, they say. Whole town saw him ride in with ice on his coat." Owen said nothing. He paid, tipped his hat to the stunned clerk, and left. The weight of their words did not show on his face, but it followed him like a second shadow. Behind those whispers stood Frank Dawson. Frank was a bitter man, a rancher known more for his grudges than his work. He had once made advances toward Anna shortly after her husband passed, and had not taken her rejection well. Now, seeing her survive and find shelter, not in his care, but at Owen Garrett's, lit a bitter fire in him. She ran to the first man who opened his door. Frank sneered to anyone who would listen at the tavern, half dead and now living with him up there day and night. "You call that proper?" A few women in town who prided themselves on reputation more than kindness echoed his tone. "It's about the example. What are we teaching our daughters?" Others hesitated. They remembered Anna as gentle, hard-working, a good mother, but whispers have a way of staining even the cleanest names. Back at the ranch, Anna sat on the porch with her daughter in her arms. When Owen returned and she saw the tightness in his jaw, she didn't need to ask. She knew. "They're talking, aren't they?" He nodded slow. Frank started it. Others joined in. She stood, swaying slightly from weakness, and went inside. Within minutes, she was packing. "I won't have Sophie grow up in whispers," she said firmly, though her hands trembled. "I won't let her walk into town and see shame in every eye or worse." Owen watched, unmoving. Then softly he spoke. "I'll ride with you wherever you go, but I won't let fear decide for you." His voice was steady, but his heart thundered. From behind the doorframe, a small voice interrupted. Sophie had heard everything. She stepped out, cheeks flushed, little fists clenched at her sides. "I heard them saying bad things about Mama." Anna turned, startled. "Sophie, you don't need to." But the girl lifted her chin. "My Mama is brave," she said loud and clear, voice shaking but unwavering. "She saved me from the ice. She walked through snow. And Mr. Owen is kind. He saved us both." Silence. A neighbor who had wandered up the path stood frozen. More people in the town had gathered than either Owen or Anna realized, and every one of them heard the girl. The rawness in her tone, the conviction in her tiny frame. It was stronger than any sermon, more honest than any defense. A woman in the back wiped her eyes. A man near the steps looked down at his boots. No one spoke. Anna knelt and pulled Sophie into her arms, holding her tight. Owen stood beside them, not speaking, but something in his eyes had softened, the edge of pain dulled by the edge of pride. No more words were needed, because when truth is spoken by a child, it cuts deeper than rumor and heals faster than silence. The wind had softened by morning, but snow still blanketed the roof in thick silence. Inside the old ranch house, something had changed. Not in the weather, but in the air. Owen stood out front, eyes scanning the sagging beams above the porch. The roof had held through the storm, but barely. The woman and her daughter resting inside deserved better than barely. He climbed onto the ladder without a word and began stripping damaged shingles, hammering in new ones he'd salvaged from the shed. He worked slow, methodical, shoulders hunched against the chill. He didn't wait for thanks. He didn't ask for approval. He simply built something stronger, one nail at a time. Inside, Anna watched through the window, daughter cradled against her shoulder. Her body still ached from the cold, but her heart ached more from the sight of a man working without pride or demand. Just kindness. That evening, Sophie set the table. She stood on her tiptoes to smooth out the napkins, trying to fold them like she remembered her papa doing when he was still alive. They weren't perfect, but she was proud. Anna ladled soup into tin bowls, humming softly. The aroma of carrots, potatoes, and leftover chicken filled the small kitchen. Owen entered quietly, removing his coat and hanging it by the door. His hands were cracked and calloused from the day, but when he reached for the salt, he passed it gently like it was the most natural thing in the world. They ate without much talk, just the clinking of spoons, the crackle of the hearth, and the occasional happy hum from Sophie by the stove. It was a simple meal. Soup, stale bread, warm tea. But to the three of them, it might as well have been a feast. At one point, Owen looked up and caught Sophie watching him. "What is it, sweetheart?" he asked softly. Sophie shook her head, grinning. "This feels like home." Neither adult spoke, but they both smiled. After the meal, Owen excused himself and went to the old trunk at the foot of his bed. He hadn't opened it in years. Not since the funeral. He lifted the lid slowly, dust motes dancing in the lantern light. Inside was a folded dress, a dried ribbon, and a small wooden box. He brought the box back into the kitchen and held it out to Anna. She looked at him puzzled. "What's this?" Owen didn't sit. He only stood there, eyes kind but distant. "It was Clara's," he said, "a silver bracelet. She wore it the day we were married." Anna hesitated, her hand hovering. "I can't." "You can," he said gently. "For Sophie, it brought love once. Maybe it will again." Her fingers closed around the box. She didn't open it yet. She only whispered, "Thank you." Later that night, after Anna had gone to bed and Sophie had curled into her quilts, Owen sat alone at the table, a cup of cooling tea untouched beside him. He pulled out a sheet of paper and dipped the pen. He had written letters before to no one, to ghosts, to himself. But tonight, he addressed it to the one family that had every right to hate him, Clara's sister. Dear Margaret, it's been 7 winters. I don't expect forgiveness, and I wouldn't know what to do with it if it came. But I want you to know I found light again. It's not the same. It never could be. But something knocked at my door one night. A little girl, scared, freezing, asking for help. And in helping her, I found something I thought I'd lost forever, a reason to light the lanterns again. The ink bled slightly as he paused. Then he finished. I hope you're well. I hope one day, if you ever find your way out here, you'll meet the reason I came back to life. It all started with a knock at midnight. He folded the letter, sealed it, and placed it beside the lantern. Outside, the snow had stopped falling. Inside, the light stayed on, and for the first time in years, Owen Garrett didn't feel alone. Spring came late to Silver Creek, but when it did, it came gently. The thick layers of snow had receded, leaving behind damp earth and the first brave clusters of wild flowers pushing up along the fence line. The air smelled of pine and turned soil. For the first time in many years, the sun felt warm again. Owen was in the field, hammering new posts into the ground, replacing what winter had cracked and broken. Each swing of the mallet echoed not just strength, but purpose. On the porch, Anna sat with a basket beside her, folding clean linens. Her sleeves were rolled, hair pinned up, and for the first time since that harrowing night, her cheeks carried color. She paused to look out across the field at Owen. Sophie was barefoot in the yard, chasing a butterfly with a ribbon in her hand, her laughter as light as the breeze. Chickens pecked nearby, and from the open kitchen window came the scent of fresh bread. The ranch, once a place of silence and shadows, now pulsed with life. It was no longer just Owen's house. It was something more. That evening, Anna set the table with care. She used the best dishes, still chipped but polished, and wiped the wooden surface until it glowed in the fading sun. She steeped tea leaves in a tin pot and lit the small lamp, not for necessity, but for comfort. When Owen stepped in, wiping dirt from his hands, she met him with a quiet smile. Not words. That was her invitation. That was her yes. Sophie took her seat between them, chattering as she passed the bread and talked about birds and clouds and the kitten she had named Snowflake. She was the thread, sewing their stories together with her voice. Anna reached to pour Owen a cup of tea. As she handed it to him, her fingers brushed his. He did not pull back. Instead, he looked at her, really looked, and she looked back. Neither spoke, neither needed to. In that glance, there was more than gratitude, more than companionship. There was a promise, unspoken, but strong. They had survived something dark and unrelenting, and now with the snow gone, their hearts had room to bloom. After supper, Anna disappeared into the other room. She returned holding something carefully folded. A coat. Owen's coat, the one he had wrapped around Sophie the night she knocked on his door. She stepped forward and without a word draped it over his shoulders. You gave this to save someone you didn't know, she said, voice soft but sure. I'm keeping it now. And the man who gave it. Owen stood frozen for a moment, eyes locked on hers. Then he placed his hand over hers where it still rested on the fabric. There was no need for more words. Later that night, the porch lantern glowed, not out of fear, but by choice. Owen sat outside as Sophie danced in the grass, naming fireflies, chasing their glow. She paused, picked up the lantern, and turned to him. I want to name it, she declared. Owen raised an eyebrow. The lantern. Sophie nodded. It's hope, she said firmly, because it keeps coming back. Owen laughed, the sound warm and unburdened. Anna came to the doorway, arms crossed, and smiled at the scene. The darkness was still there, somewhere on the edges of memory, but it no longer ruled the house. Light had found its way in, and it stayed. 1 year later, The winds no longer howled through Silver Creek. They sang. In the mornings, children's laughter echoed from the front room of the ranch house. Anna had turned it into a schoolroom. Kids from nearby homesteads came for reading, writing, and warm biscuits fresh from the oven. Their muddy boots lined up on the porch, and their coats hung on makeshift pegs near the hearth. Books, laughter, and the scent of honey butter filled the air. Owen opened the old barn and began hosting weary travelers. Ranchers, trappers, and lost wanderers all found coffee, kindness, and a roof under his care. He never asked too many questions, only offered warmth and a place to rest. Sophie had grown taller. Her braids were longer, her freckles more pronounced, but her eyes were still just as clear, just as full of light. Every morning, just as the sun peeked over the ridge, 3 soft knocks would come at Owen's door. "Morning, Mr. Owen. Breakfast's ready." It had become their ritual, and every morning, Owen answered with the same words and a warm grin. "Be right there, sweetheart." The knocks no longer signaled panic nor desperation. They were an invitation to family, to warmth, to the day ahead. An echo of something broken made whole. Sometimes Sophie would knock even if she knew he was already up, just to be sure the day began right, and Owen always answered, even if he had already been standing behind the door. One evening, as the sky burned gold and rose, the whole family walked up the gentle hill above the ranch. Owen carried Sophie on his back in a playful ride. Anna walked beside him, hand in hand, her dress brushing wild flowers. A small dog barked joyfully at their heels. They stopped at the crest, looking down at the house, its windows glowing with golden light, smoke curling gently from the chimney. A swing creaked on the porch, and the garden roses shimmered in the dusk like a promise kept. Owen turned to look at them, at the woman who brought spring into his frozen life, at the daughter who knocked on his door when the world had gone silent, and at the family who was born in the middle of a storm. He took a slow breath. The trees swayed gently behind them, rustling like whispered blessings. And there, still hanging on the porch, the old lantern burned. Not because it had to, but because now someone always lit it. One knock changed everything. It lit a lantern that had long gone cold. It wasn't just a cry for help. It was the sound of hope coming home. If a little girl knocked at midnight, Mama needs help. The widowed rancher lit every lantern, touched your heart, hit that like button, and help us spread the warmth of hope through the coldest storms. And don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Love Stories for more heartfelt tales of love, redemption, and resilience from the rugged frontier. The lanterns are still glowing, and the stories are just getting started. See you in the next ride.